Hello, everyone. My name is Guadalupe Vega, and I'm a senior at Middlebury College, where I study molecular biology and biochemistry, as well as being on the pre-med track. In light of current events, this interview today is a part of a series of careers in public health and part of the MIDDVantage program. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Agnes Mwakingwe-Omari, a Middlebury alumni class of 2002. Dr. Agnes Mwakingwe-Omari is a physician scientist who since August 2019 has been working as a senior clinical and research development lead at GlaxoSmithKline, conducting research in vaccines. Dr. Mwakingwe-Omari was born in Tanzania and says she was lucky to get a scholarship to attend high school at United World Colleges of the Atlantic. She emigrated to the US for education, where she attended Middlebury College. Matriculating in February, Agnes remembers being in shock when she stepped out of the Greyhound bus in front of the old library building to find herself in knee-deep snow. Since graduating from Middlebury in 2002 with a major in chemistry, Agnes enrolled in a medical scientist training program at Albert Einstein College of Medicine in Bronx, New York, and in 2010, she obtained her MD PhD in molecular biology and immunology, studying host malaria parasite interactions. She then went on to complete an internal medicine residency training program at Johns Hopkins Bayview Medical Center in 2013. Before joining GSK, Agnes spent 6 years at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases at the National Institutes of Health as an adult infectious disease clinical and research fellow and staff clinician. Agnes says she was introduced and immersed in clinical research at the NIH, an area that combines her passion for patient care and medical research. Although through the majority of her career, she has worked on the malaria parasite both in the lab and in clinic, Agnes is now working on a different vaccine at GSK and is excited to learn a new industry and apply and further develop her skills in a new field. Welcome, Dr. Agnes Mwakingwe.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction.
Of course. So I would like to begin by asking, what exactly does your job look like, or what you do on a day-to-day basis? And if there are any current projects you would like to discuss that you are currently working on with GSK.
Yeah, so on a day-to-day basis, so I'm a clinical research and development lead, which really means my main job is responsible for the scientific integrity of the various vaccine studies that we're doing and what I'm responsible for. So different from if you're the principal investigator actually doing the study, I'm on a sponsor side of things. So I'm a little removed from where the research actually happens. So my work on a daily basis involves talking to a lot of people in different places, different functions, so statisticians, data management, program managers, as we're all trying together to manage the studies we're doing around the world. Sometimes it's discussions from a global perspective. Sometimes we are speaking with teams in the local level. Sometimes we're managing some issues that happened at the site where the study is actually happening. So there's quite a bit of meetings in my daily basis and discussion with different people. I also spend quite a bit of time just thinking about studies, analyzing the data that we've already collected, doing literature research and keeping current with what's going on with the field. So we do quite a bit of that too. So that's how really my day looks like.
Okay.
It's a lot of computer work, I'll say.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty. And so can you talk to our listeners a little bit? I'm sure they'd be interested to hear, and what are the steps you took to where you are right now? If someone were to, students that would like to follow a similar career path that you took. So regarding after you graduated Middlebury, obtaining your MD PhD and steps after to get to work for such a well-known company like GSK. Any steps between or after all these that you would like to discuss with us?
Yeah, for me, a lot of it was either luck in a way or being in the right place at the right time. So I had always wanted to understand how the human body works, how all the various systems interact and work together. And ideally, when I was learning it, they should be working perfectly. It doesn't make sense why anybody should get sick. So understanding why people got sick, and mainly infections. How is it that our systems can be essentially in these little microorganisms can infect you and cause so much damage? Where are the gaps? Where are the holes? So in trying to understand that, there was always a question. I didn't know, how do people figure this out? So throughout the education, as I got to Middlebury, one of my classes was a biology class, molecular biology class, Bio 250, I remember specifically. The teacher that taught that class always really concentrated on the experiments that were used and the research that was done to learn a specific aspect that we were learning. And our exams used to be, if this was the question, design the experiment on how you would figure this out. So I got very interested in that, and I had an opportunity to do a summer internship with Rick Bunt in chemistry. And so I was introduced further into doing research, and I was very excited. I could design some questions and figure out how to answer them. And by the time I was time to almost graduate, I started wondering what I would do eventually, because throughout my younger age, before getting to college, I had always wanted to go to medical school, and I still wanted to do that. But now I was getting more interested in research, and I wanted to explore that better, but I wasn't sure how I could do both. Do I have to give up one, go to grad school, or go to medical school and forget about research? So I took a year off, which I think was the best thing I did at the time, to be able to figure out, have some time to evaluate what I really wanted to do. So I took a job as a research assistant at Cornell, and there I really took the opportunity to talk to various people who were around, talk to my mentors that were there as well. And as I was really struggling with this question, my boss at the time said, well, Agnes, you don't have to pick, actually. There are these programs called medical scientist training programs, the MD-PhD programs, that would allow you to do both. And for me, that was absolutely amazing, because I didn't have to give up anything. I could actually do both if I get in. So at that point, I really started trying to learn more about the programs and apply to those programs. And that's how I ended up at an MD PhD program. And I think throughout that, I really learned that there's a very important piece about being a physician scientist, because you understand the medicine, you understand the people, but you also understand the science as well. And it really helps to put the two together when you're doing research in the medical field and trying to improve people's health. So, and then after that is really a straightforward path for me. It's just internal medicine residency. I'd always been interested in infectious diseases. And since I really wanted to continue doing both, to continue doing research and also clinical care, I was lucky to be able to get into an infectious disease fellowship at the NIH. And if you know anything about the NIH, a lot of research happens there, both on the basic science side, but also a lot of clinical research. And I had always been doing basic science research, but when I got to the NIH, my director said, well, you can't go as a clinical person, you cannot go through NIH without learning clinical trials. And so that's when I started getting to learn about clinical trials, and it turned out to be the perfect fit for me, because I could combine the things I really liked the most. And that's really how I ended up here. From NIH, the shift for me to industry at the moment, it took me a while to decide whether I really wanted to shift to industry. It's always tough from academia to go to industry, but I had wanted a change at the time, and my research, at least of the company, it seemed they had quite a bit of things that I believed in, that putting patients first And that's really what I believe people should think about. And so I applied and got that job that I just started doing. So, so far so good. We'll see how it continues.
That's amazing to hear. Thank you. And so, following that, what advice or recommendations do you have, again, for students looking to follow a similar career path as yours, right now, especially during this time where in the current situation, it's becoming more and more difficult to obtain an internship or a job. So any insights, recommendations, or advice you have for current Middlebury students at the moment?
I think even though like we're quarantined and we can't really go out and interact with people, I think we have to take advantage of the situation we're in. We have to take advantage of the technology we have. For example, you can still have conversations with people. You can still schedule meetings with people you had intended to meet and talk to before. You can still do that virtually. I think there may be opportunities that may come your way that you can't at the moment foresee how they may help you in the path that you've been thinking about. But I would say you should definitely grab these opportunities because sometimes they open up some other information about yourself that you did not know. They also give you some knowledge that you hadn't known before and that you could use in a different way later in the future. So I think that's something I tried to do throughout my time, even with hesitancy sometime when somebody suggested you should do this differently. I always wondered, well, is that going to take me away from the path I'm in? But when I think back now, I think they've all been very useful twists and turns that have really guided to where I am nowadays. The other thing, get creative. I think I always think that the jobs that you guys will have an opportunity to do or will be doing probably didn't exist 10, 15 years ago. So really have an open mind about that. And if you have an idea, you also now probably have a bit of extra time that you can try and work on developing it. And you'll be able to say, you know, it was quarantine time, but this is what I worked on and this is what I developed. This is what I learned. I think you should definitely use that time and not let it go to waste.
And can you discuss a little bit more about the MD PhD program you were in? Whether did you do these programs separately or together? What was your experience like going through your MD PhD and then doing residency?
Mm-hmm. So I did them combined. So because I'm not sure how it works now, but at the time, the way it used to be, some universities split the two. Even though you enrolled into an MD PhD program, you did first your MD, completed, then you did your PhD, or vice versa. At Albert Einstein, they combined the two. So my first year had medical school classes as well as graduate school classes. They did have to restructure some of the classes so they would fit in the schedules, but that was our first year. My second year was all medical school classes, with except maybe one graduate school class. But mainly because second year at Einstein, you did systems pathogenesis. So there was really no supplementing that in graduate school, the way medical school requires it. And then when we're done with that, you third, fourth, fifth, depending how many years it takes, all those years were spent in a research lab to complete your PhD. And then once you completed your PhD, then you went back to do third and fourth year of medical school. When you complete, there are few people who did not go to residency, but most of us went and completed residency, even though quite a number just do research and don't do any clinical work. There's still quite a big percentage of people who do both or just do clinical work. So minimum is 7 years, I think, but for most, the average is probably 8 or 9 years. it's a strange situation to be, because by the time you get, for us, the way it was structured, by the time I went back to the clinic as a third-year medical student, the people I started medical school class were my attendings. So it was quite an interesting situation.
Yeah.
And then when you start your PhD years, as anybody who has gone through a PhD program will tell you, you're very excited the first year, second year, you're really excited, things are going well, you've chosen your PhD project and the lab. Third and fourth year, many people start getting quite depressed because things are not working. And then things work and then you graduate. So then it's the end. So that's kind of the typical path.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
And so now working at GSK and before this working with NIH, what differences do you see in working with these two different companies?
I think the differences mainly have to do with academia versus private company. Private company, of course, there's a business aspect of things that you have to think about. In academia, usually the main thing is to really learn and understand the science. The focus is not really to develop a product. That's a dream at the end of the day, if what you're studying would end up being a product directly, but really it's usually to understand the science. So, and that's really the main difference I see. Some of the things I was doing at the NIH, I can think that, okay, maybe practically this may not be a product that we can actually use. This is not, it's going to be a vaccine that I can actually give somebody because it requires a lot of steps. But we still did the studies and the experiments because it gave you an opportunity to really understand the science behind it. So then, now that we understand more of the science behind it, now we can move to the next step to design something that could be used as a vaccine. In the business world, I think there's that thought process probably becomes a bit earlier in the development or whatever, in this case, a vaccine you're looking at. I think that comes earlier. One thing that's, for me, is very crucial is that regardless of where it's academia or it's a pharmaceutical industry, the fundamentals are the same for clinical trials. The safety of the patients, of the participants of the study, is always number one and is paramount. And as soon as you start, what's the word I'm looking for? As long as you start compromising the safety of the patients, you're in trouble. So that's fundamental. The second part is safety of your staff, right, who are doing the studies. And the third, and also most important part, is just the integrity of the data that you're collecting. So those main fundamentals stay the same, regardless really of where you are. And for the most part, I'm doing clinical trials, and that's what I'm managing. So those fundamentals between the two worlds that I moved from and where I am right now are the same. So it doesn't change for me on a daily basis.
And so now, regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, how do you see that this pandemic is going to change your industry in the future? And also, are there any big changes that you're currently already seeing due to current situations?
Yeah, I think, however sad and devastating the COVID-19 pandemic is at the moment, and we really don't know how long it's going to last. One thing, maybe two main things that I see in what we do is it's opened up new ways of thinking, new ways of working. There was already an effort to decentralize clinical trials. So clinical trials happen, you have a clinic, it's set up to do a study, you're expecting people participating in the study to come to the clinic for the major interventions that you're doing. So if you're administering vaccine, you're expecting people to come to the clinic to get that vaccine. For the most part, that's how they're done. In this situation, you can imagine you really can't have people coming into the clinic to get your vaccine because everybody is at home and is not supposed to go anywhere. It also has limited participation in various diversity groups for various reasons, either people who are really sick or people who are very old, people who are disabled and they cannot go there. And because of that, they have not been represented in research, and therefore you don't really know if there are any differences in the safety or in the efficacy of whatever product you're studying. So the pandemic has really opened up, and I think is going to speed up the process of trying to decentralize studies, as in instead of having people come to the centers to get those interventions, rather the investigators go to the people. And the hope is that more people will be able to participate, and more groups that have not been represented before in the studies will also be able to participate. We're talking a lot more now about using virtual communications, sort of similar to telemedicine. As you can imagine right now, if you're ill and you need to call your primary care doctor, most clinics are doing telemedicine. So ideally implementing those similar measures in the conduct of clinical trials. But the major thing I think that will also have a lasting impact is just the collaboration between various teams. In academia, collaboration is very common, but now we're seeing even with these big pharmaceutical industries that usually compete very intensely with one another, and now collaborating to be able to create a vaccine against the pandemic, COVID-19. And I think that's good because it started conversation between these two groups. They start to get into understandings. We develop those paths that hopefully we can continue collaborating in the future. The competition is good, but also I think it leads to also some waste, especially if like two different companies are working on the same thing that it probably looks a lot similar. That I think will also be diminished. So those things I'm very excited about, and I think will have a lasting impact even after the pandemic.
Thank you. And again, right now with this, with COVID-19 going around, I'm hearing a lot of conversations and a lot of people talking about, oh, when is there finally going to be a vaccine, and why is it taking so long? And a lot of people don't seem to understand the process and how long it takes to make a vaccine, first going through all the clinical trials that must be done, and all the testing. Again, you talked about your patient safety when doing all this. So if you can just speak to our listeners about the process of making a vaccine and getting it approved and finally getting it distributed to the general population.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a struggle, even for those of us who understand the procedures that need to take place, that it still takes a long time. We sometimes look at these studies where it probably takes 20, 30 years from when somebody first discovered something in the laboratory until it gets to a stage where it can be given to people by their doctors. And the main reason has to do with exactly what you said, is evaluating the safety. So there's a lot of rules and regulations that are placed in between in order to ensure that anything that's going to be given to people is as safe as we have been able to evaluate it. So most of the studies start in the test tube, and that may take years. We're lucky in this situation with the COVID-19 because people had already been working on coronaviruses. They're not exactly the one that's causing the pandemic right now, but they're similar. Therefore, they've learned quite a bit about it. They had already identified some good antigens that could be used to elicit very good immune system against the coronaviruses. So we're already maybe 4 or 5 years ahead of the curve at that stage. And they're already, even so the first part, they still have to do animal work, make sure that it's safe in animals. You start with small animals, you move to bigger animals, you have to repeat the study. Experiments always have to be reproducible. And so after that's done, that may take a few months, it may take a year or more before you can get to the first study in people, to really be able to show that this is safe when you administer in people. And because of the caution that we really have to take, those safety studies, they're called phase 1 studies, you start with very few number of people, and your main goal is to really show that when you administer your products to a person, you're not causing major problems. You start with a small study, a small number of people, you increase the size of the people that you administer the product. And at that point, you kind of have to stop, and you have to get your information to the regulatory bodies to really evaluate that, okay, this does seem safe, and you can cautionary proceed to looking at whether it's effective, be it a vaccine, be it a medication, the similar steps really. Once you've shown that it's effective, that's usually a smaller number of people. There's about phase 2 studies. Once you've shown it's reasonably safe, it's reasonably effective, then you still need to get approval from the regulatory authorities that, okay, now you can move on to the next stage, which is really to show the effectiveness in a larger group of people. And those are big phase 3 studies. Those studies can sometimes, depending on what you're looking for, there could be thousands of people enrolled in those studies. We've done some studies where they have 30,000 people. You can imagine different with animal, with mice, for example, you can say, I need 20 mice. You can get all your mice together in one day and vaccinate them. This is people. So it takes a while to get everybody that you need for the study to get enrolled in the study. So it may take a while to even get everybody you need to include, and then to follow up to really show whether it was effectiveness that you're showing of your product, or whatever it is you were looking for at the time. So that's why it really takes a lot of years. And even after that, and the regulatory authorities say, okay, this product is approved and it can be sold in the markets, your job is not done. You still, now that the product is out in the market for everybody to be able to access, you still have to monitor the safety of that product, because you've only studied a small number of people. When it's in the market, now you have a larger amount of people. So those rare things that you had not seen in the studies, that's when they start showing up, which is why you can see that sometimes you have a medicine that had been approved and it was in market, and then later the FDA says we have to pull it out of the market because we've seen that it causes harm. It's not because the job wasn't done properly before. It's just that those events are very rare, and now that it's out in the market, that's when they're seen. So it's a balance between trying to make sure there's nothing that's unsafe that's getting to people, but also trying to shorten the amount of time to get important and effective medications to people. So I think now, it's a time, we have a pandemic, we're really looking for vaccines and medications to be able to manage the infection. It's really forcing people's hands to really find ways to make sure they can balance how long it takes and how safe and effective the interventions are. I hope that helps a bit.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I believe those are all the questions that I have for you, unless there are any closing remarks that you would like to add on your part.
Yeah. I think that as tough as it may seem at the moment, I think we just need to be hopeful. There's a lot of devastation, but I think there's also an opportunity that we can take at this time to improve how we work, improve how we interact with people, how we interact with the world in general. It's a lot of opportunity for people to find other new things to do. Like I said earlier, you guys are the next generation, and you definitely have the opportunity at the moment to change the path. And I think this is a good time to do that. So I think we should take the positives where we can and think about them.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Mwakingwe.
Oh, you're welcome, and good luck.
Thank you.